Hey guys, this next video deals with the events leading to the Civil War, and it goes with this pre-Civil War timeline of events. This is going to go pretty quickly because these early events are ones that we've already studied, and we're going to end at 1854. We're not going to cover the whole timeline this time around. So let's go ahead and head straight to the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint shows us this first graphic. It reminds us of what the Missouri Compromise was. It allowed Missouri to enter as a slave state, Maine as a free state, and it drew this 36-30 line where everything north of that would be free and south of that would be slave. That was the first major compromise we came up with in the pre-Civil War period. So on your timeline, it's called the Missouri Compromise. Maine enters the Union as a free state. Missouri enters as a slave state. It prohibits slavery north of the 36-30 line and the rest of the Louisiana Purchase. Okay? The next thing there on your timeline is all about the Wilmot Proviso. The Wilmot Proviso suggested that we ban slavery in the new territories gained in the Mexican War. It was not passed, as we've talked about before, but it did kind of start the huge debate about, well, what were we going to do about slavery in the new territories? And so it really kind of is the starting gun of the pre-Civil War slavery debate. In 1848, we have an election, creatively called the Election of 48. The hero of the Mexican War wins. His name is Zachary Taylor. He was a Whig. He's going to be the last Whig elected before the party dies out. Some other new parties are going to be founded too, one of which is the Free Soil Party. The Free Soil Party, we'll be talking more about it in a separate video, but they actually oppose the spread of slavery. They don't just oppose slavery everywhere. They just don't want it to spread into the new territories. So this is a typo here. It needs to be which oppose the spread of slavery. And so this kind of tips you off that we're going to get some new parties forming and some old parties dying out. We'll talk more about that later. So the next thing on the timeline involves... oh no, I just need to remind you of the next event on the timeline, which we've already studied, which is the Compromise of 1850. So remember, the Compromise of 1850 brought us this new territory here. It decided that California would be free, and this territory would be ruled by popular sovereignty. So it helped us deal with the realities of new land, and it said that California would enter as free, and that Utah and New Mexico would have popular sovereignty. Remember, it had other parts, too, that were sources of tension between the North and the South, including the slave trade was banned in D.C., the fugitive slave law was strengthened, President Zachary Taylor died. He was opposed to the compromise, but his Vice President Millard Fillmore helps pass it. Okay? Now, we're finally getting into new territory here, things we haven't talked about. And that first major thing that we want to talk about is 1852. And it relates to the attitudes about slavery in the North. Okay? We kind of have this sense today that everyone in the North was opposed to slavery and that abolition was the default position of Northerners in this time period. And that's not actually the case. I've actually told you in class that the default position of most Northerners is just apathy. A lot of them are recent immigrants. They don't have slaves. They've never seen slavery. They're just apathetic about slavery in general. And the person who's going to change that is this is Harriet Beecher Stowe. She writes this book. It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Uncle Tom's Cabin is all about this slave, a very faithful and noble slave named Uncle Tom, who is very loyal to his master, and the slave master is extremely cruel, Simon Legree. And at the end of the book, Uncle Tom is whipped to death by his master. He becomes kind of like a Christological figure in the book. The book is really not very good literature. It's really melodramatic. You're never going to read it in English 11 because it's not well written. But what's important about Uncle Tom's Cabin is that suddenly all these people in the North who read the book suddenly care about slavery and suddenly find themselves to be against slavery. So I kind of call Harriet Beecher Stowe like the Oprah Winfrey of her time. You know, Oprah Winfrey took a whole group of women, stay-at-home moms, who, you know, had previously maybe been an untapped resource of advocacy and interest in the country, and Oprah Winfrey started these book clubs and this angel network, and she got them all motivated to do pretty amazing stuff in the United States in some different areas. And Harriet Beecher Stowe did the same thing. She like awakened a whole group of people in the North who suddenly realized they did care about the slavery issue, whereas before they had not. Okay, so What goes here is that Uncle Tom's Cabin is published. Southerners were outraged by it, by the way. They wrote their own accounts, including Aunt Eva's cabin, where Aunt Eva lived in a cute little house with curtains and all that kind of stuff. But Harriet Beecher Stowe, the daughter of an abolitionist, did more for the abolition movement than anyone else by writing this book, kind of awakening the North's opposition to slavery in general. Okay. Also in 1852, we have a weak president elected. His name is Franklin Pierce. We'll be watching the president's video on him. And we'll be talking more about this, but the Whig Party is going to split over slavery and die out. Now, this is also a moment to pause and think about these presidents of the 1850s. These presidents of the 1850s are people that you've probably not heard of. People like Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, not household names in America. The reason is these are all men who kind of hedged the issue of the day, the slavery question. They didn't take a clear position on it because they knew that that would make it difficult for them to be elected. So the first president of the 1850s who takes a clear position on slavery, you know his name very well. His name is Abraham Lincoln. So there's a reason why these presidents of the 1850s are kind of forgotten. That's because they just didn't really take a position on the most important issue of the day. Okay? So, here are some flyers that advertise Uncle Tom's Cabin and show it being sold. It's called The Greatest Book of the Age here. And here's also Harriet Beecher Stowe being kind of lionized by adoring fans and shown here in a very kind of inspiring posture, almost as an angel on earth, bringing truth. Okay? So, the next thing that happens is in 1854, and this is what I call the dumbest law ever passed in American history, probably. The reason is that through the Compromise of 1850, the slavery status of the entire nation has pretty much been determined. All we have to do is hold these elections here and here to determine what will happen with slavery, and we're done. Well, unfortunately, Stephen Douglas and others saw that Franklin Pierce was a relatively weak political figure and one who really wanted to make everyone happy, and so they pressed upon him this idea that we need to repeal the Missouri Compromise, and instead of this land up here being closed to slavery and therefore necessarily free, they decide to open it up to popular sovereignty in the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. The reason is that they want to get a transcontinental railroad built. Stephen Douglas and other investors, and if it's not going to go down here in the South where the Southerners want it built, they want it to go up here in the North. But in order to get the South to go along with this, which they'd be very angry because they want the railroad built in their region, they've got to give the South something that will please them. So they're going to build the railroad up here, and as a kind of a bone to throw the South, they're going to offer them this territory will now be open to popular sovereignty, so it's possible that slavery could spread into this territory. The Southerners agree with this. The reason why I consider this just such a dumb law is it's basically going to kind of peel the scab off of a wound that was healing nicely. Okay, the Compromise of 1850 and the Missouri Compromise had kind of healed over this issue, and we had a nice scab forming, a nice Band-Aid that had formed, and everything was okay. And after this moment, it's going to be like they peeled the scab off of the wound, or they peeled the Band-Aid off, and it's going to result in bleeding Kansas, because what's going to happen is that they're going to hold the elections here for whether this territory should be free or slave, and both sides are going to cheat. And it's that cheating that's going to lead to a contested election and two governments forming, and that will be called Bleeding Kansas. So let's go to the timeline and see what exactly it is you need to know. In 1854, they passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and it says that we're going to reject the Missouri Compromise. So they're going to repeal the Missouri Compromise and divide the territory into Kansas and Nebraska, and they're going to determine the slavery question by popular sovereignty. But in 1855, we get Bleeding Kansas, because both pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces claim that they won those elections because both sides cheated, and it leads to a little mini civil war in Kansas that is called Bleeding Kansas. So this is the Civil War before the Civil War, all of which could have been avoided if they had not passed this law. And from Bleeding Kansas forward, we're kind of propelling ourselves ever toward the Civil War, and really it's going to be impossible to go back and reach a compromise that will make everyone happy. So we're going to stop the video there at Bleeding Kansas, and we'll pick back up tomorrow. In between these two, we're going to talk a little bit about the political parties that formed and died during this time period to help you better understand the political realities of the pre-war period. Okay? 10 minutes, not bad. I'm proud of myself. Bye.